All right, welcome everybody to our 60th meetup of the Crypto Community Minds. It's a warm summer night in June and we have a lot of crypto law to talk about. So today's topic is MiCA and AML regulations. We titled it The Dance of Control and Innovation in DAOs and DeFi. And yeah, my name is Jake. I'm a legal counsel here at Brainbot Technologies. Brainbot Technologies is a venture builder and Web3 service boutique. And my job has a lot to do with MiCA and AML regulations. And I want to share some thoughts and insights that I have in this regard. And hopefully after this talk, you will know a bit more about what MiCA has in store for DAOs and DeFi, and have some food for thought about how this industry and this sector will develop under the European market regulation. So we go ahead. First, our next event, our next meetup will be on 4th of July. So we are still open for scheduling, welcoming ideas. A lot of the other months this year are already kind of booked out. So July, if you want to contribute something, feel free to do so and let us know. Yeah, for today's kind of topics, there is, first of all, MiCA and its relevance for DAOs and DeFi. Then we have the concept of smart contracts as ownerless machines, which is kind of a train of thought that I want to share in this regard. And then we have the topic of decentralization of smart contract arrangements in general, possible metrics and possible framings for smart contract arrangements and how they can be possibly be decentralized. And then we'll take a short peek at the AML regime that is also will be changed on European level. And we'll take a look how that is relevant for DAOs and DeFi as well. How do I move? Okay, wonderful. So let's dive right in. This clicking is not working. Oh, it's delayed. So first of all, MiCA's relevance for DAOs and DeFi. MiCA's key objectives are market integrity, consumer protection, and financial stability. And that means it regulates three key areas, which are the issuance of crypto assets, crypto asset services, and the prevention of market abuse. I want to briefly share MiCA's table of content. Let me just skip right through them. So overall, we have 9 titles. The ones most relevant for the entire topic of decentralized finance are Title 1, where it's defining the subject matter and the scope and the definitions. And Title 2 deals with crypto assets other than asset reference tokens and e-money tokens, which are also mostly the DeFi-related tokens. And then we have Title 5, which is about the authorization or operating conditions for CASPs, crypto asset service providers, which obviously you don't want to be as a as a DeFi project. So first of all, what are the types of crypto assets defined by MiCA? We have overall the term, the catch-all phrase, crypto assets, which means a digital representation of value or rights, which may be transferred and stored electronically using distributed ledger technology or similar technology. So rather broad, probably everything is a crypto asset at the end. And then you have 3 subgroups of this term. You have the utility token, which only plays a role in MiCA for certain exemptions, which we're not going to dive into in detail. But these are tokens that are only intended to provide access to a good or service supplied by the issuer of that token. And then we have 2 other major groups, which are the e-money tokens, in short EMT. They purport to maintain a stable value by referencing to value of one official currency, basically a European stable coin. And then we have the asset reference token, ART, which is basically not an e-money token, but it purports to maintain a stable value by referencing to any other value or combination thereof. What kind of persons or activities are in scope of MiCA? We have 4 roles. First of all, it's the issuer. That means the natural or legal person or other undertaking who issues crypto assets. We have the offerer, which means the person that or the issuer that offers crypto assets to the public. We have the seeker of admission to trading. There's no definition to that, but it's basically about those persons that seek admission to trading on a crypto asset trading platform, which is a defined crypto asset service under MiCA. And we have the crypto asset service provider, legal person or other undertaking whose occupation or business is the provision of one or more crypto asset services to clients on a professional basis. These are the 4 kind of regulated persons or groups. Did I skip? Okay. Yeah. So the summary of the requirements for these persons are the issuer generally has no requirements unless he issues ARTs or EMTs, so asset reference tokens or e-money tokens. You have the offerer, which offers the crypto assets to the public. He has to be a legal person, has to draft a white paper, notify that white paper, and publish the white paper. The same counts for the seeker of admission to trading. And you have the crypto as a service providers who have detailed requirements laid out depending on the type of service. So what are these services? We have custody and administration of crypto assets, operation of a trading platform, exchange of crypto assets, execution of orders, placing, reception and transmission of orders, providing advice, providing portfolio management, and providing transfer services. So this list, for someone that is familiar with the regular financial industry or financial services, all of these sound pretty familiar to what is in the TradFi sector. And these are basically the crypto equivalents to those services. Keep in mind, this has to be done on a professional basis and has to be done for a client. So if we look at an example, all of these are further defined as such. If we look at the example of custody, that means safekeeping or controlling on behalf of clients the crypto assets or the means of access to such crypto assets were applicable in the form of private cryptographic keys. So that's crypto custody as a service. Another example would be operation of a trading platform, which means the management of one or more multilateral systems which bring together or facilitate bringing together multiple third-party purchasing and selling interests in crypto assets in the system and in accordance with its rules in a way that results in a contract, either by exchanging crypto assets for funds or by exchange of crypto assets for other crypto assets. This definition also is very similar to the definition of regular MTF or a trading platform in traditional finance in financial instruments. So, and all of these services have different requirements, which we're not going to go in detail. Just a brief overview here from a paper that I found. For example, if we look at the custodians, we have contractual arrangement with clients are required. They need to register the positions of the clients, have the assets segregated, and they have certain liability. Trading platform, for example, has to have certain operating rules, is prohibited from dealing on own account, has to document and make sure the resilience of the trading systems, etc., etc. So there are different requirements which also should be very familiar to those accustomed to traditional financial services that are similar. So what's the relevance for DAOs and DeFi, you might ask now. There is a recital 22 in this current last version that will soon be published. And it sounds like this. It says this regulation should apply to natural and legal persons and certain other undertakings, and to the crypto asset services and activities performed, provided, or controlled directly or indirectly by them, including when part of such activities or services is performed in a decentralized manner. So they're saying even if, so first of all, other undertakings could cover DAOs potentially. And they're saying even when part of the activities is performed in a decentralized manner, that's not sufficient. So if only part of the service is decentralized, then we would fall under this regulation with all the requirements that I laid out before. It goes on to say where crypto assets services are provided in a fully decentralized manner without any intermediary, they should not fall within the scope of this regulation. So apparently it is possible to undertake these kind of services in a decentralized manner, and that should not be covered by MiCA. Also, where crypto assets have no identifiable issuer, they should not fall within the scope of Title 2, 3, and 4 of this regulation. Crypto asset service providers providing services in respect of such crypto assets should, however, be covered by this regulation. So we have crypto asset services provided in a decentralized manner. That could be DeFi. We're going to dive deeper into that. And there can be crypto assets that don't have an issuer, and then they don't have the requirements such as white paper and stuff like that. But crypto asset service providers that deal with these crypto assets for their clients do fall under the regulation. So what does it mean, fully decentralized manner? There is currently no official guidance, and MiCA does not elaborate on this topic. But the EU Commission has to publish a DeFi assessment report within 18 months after entry into force of MiCA, which will be around the end of next year, end of 2024. So we have to look out for this assessment and what it says about decentralized finance. There is a very recent report from the ESRB, the European Stability Risk Board. They have a task force on crypto assets and decentralized finance. And they mention that there is apparently, from their perspective, a spectrum of centralization to decentralization that can be broken down into 3 rough categories. You have centralized finance, also called CeFi. Then you have DeFi, and then you have true DeFi. We will take a closer look at that, but that is like the closest to the legislator's opinion that is currently out there. But it's not the official binding statement, so it's an opinion of this task force. There is the IOSCO, which issued a decentralized finance report in 2022, also talking about a spectrum. Just to mention that, there's a link in here. We will share the slides afterwards. You can dive into that. But they are basically also saying there's a spectrum. There needs to be a dispersed network of independent users, and they need to have equal access to information and the ability to propose and vote to change any aspect of the protocol. This is, I guess, a bit superficial view, but it's interesting that they have all of these aspects in there and talk about a spectrum. So in order to get better idea about this spectrum, I want to share with you a thought that I have in my mind when thinking about smart contracts, and then we look closer into the decentralization metrics that are possible. So first of all, can a smart contract, which is basically often all that there is to a DeFi protocol, can that be at all a decentralized manner? A smart contract always has a developer, at least. It always has someone who deploys it, and it may be controlled by an admin. So further, it may collect fees for someone. So maybe for smart contracts, we need to adapt the concept of decentralization. And I have this image in mind here with kind help from AI image generation of ownerless machines. I think it's generally a concept that is very common when talking about smart contracts. You see them as kind of vending machines. And I want to expand on that and say they are kind of vending machines that ideally don't have an owner and don't favor anyone. And ultimately, when you interact with them, I think the goal should be that a smart contract whose functions, when executed by any user, do not create a legal obligation for anyone. It's like a neutral kind of protocol that just sits there. You can interact with it, but it does not, by interacting with it, you are not expressing a will to be legally bound. But that obviously depends on the design and the circumstances of that contract. And I want to look a bit closer on that. So first of all, a brief excursus to the legal nature of ERC20 tokens, which ERC20 obviously also is a smart contracts and transfers. And there it's pretty much accepted in the legal academic discourse that holding a token is a legal position that is not captured by civil property laws. At least I'm talking about the German perspective. They're themselves not things or rights. And note that doesn't mean you don't have to pay taxes or they can't be stolen without consequences. These are kind of different topics. We're talking about the property laws and the kind of the legal rails that these move on. They just simply don't exist. So consequently, transferring a token is itself not captured by civil law concepts. And it's a purely factual process based on the rules of the smart contract and the Ethereum client. So that being said, I want to kind of expand on that and say maybe also the other interaction with other types of smart contracts can have this kind of legal neutrality and not creating obligations. What is the basis for any obligation? You basically have 4 types of obligations. You have contractual, you have property law, you have tort, and you have unjust enrichment. And thinking about smart contracts here, a contractual obligation could be created by matching declarations of intent. That's basically how you agree to a contract. Property law, as I just said, doesn't apply. Tort is a kind of fault-based liability. So let's assume there is no fault-based liability in this case. And unjust enrichment is not really solvable by a smart contract. That's a more academic problem for the lawyers. So I want to focus on the first topic because I think we can put aside the other 3. So the idea is, how can I create a smart contract protocol that does not lead to its users having mutual agreements with each other through the smart contract? So obviously the term smart contract itself is not really helpful. That's why in 2018, also Vitalik said, at this point, I quite regret adopting the term smart contracts. I should have called them something more boring and technical, perhaps something like persistent scripts, which I think is getting at that point that I'm trying to make with my concept of ownerless machines. Let's look at the situation here, for example, a transfer or interaction on a trading platform. In the current type of setup, you have user A and user B. And yeah, they want to interact, either transfer crypto assets or trade them mutually. And in the middle, you have the service provider, and you have kind of three contractual relations here. You have the one between the users, possibly, and each user has a contractual relationship with the service provider. Or if we take a different example, exchange or custody, you have the service provider on the one side, and you have multiple users, ABC, that have a direct contractual relationship with this service provider. So what if we replace the service provider with a smart contract, which is what we want to achieve with DeFi systems, I guess. So in that case, we have the smart contract in the middle, and we have user A and user B doing the transfer. There can still be a contractual relationship between those two individuals, but ideally the relationship with the smart contract itself would not be a contractual one. Or even simpler, on that side of exchange or custody, where you have this more direct bilateral relation, there would also be no contractual relationship, ideally. So here you could imagine, for example, a smart wallet. There it's, I think, pretty straightforward. But another question would be, for example, an AMM, an automated market maker, a trading protocol. There it's not that clear if we're in this type of relationship here or more in this one. So because the difference here is, as you see, even if there's a smart contract playing a role, there's still two users kind of communicating with each other through the smart contract. So we still do have some kind of obligation that can be created. There can be a legal layer to this interaction through the smart contract. And in these situations, it's just user with smart contract and not through smart contract with another user. So this is a difference that I want to point out that might play a role in these setups. Yeah, we have a question, yeah?
What about the access to the machine? Is this for you part of the transaction? Because you use it, or if you nowadays use exchange machines, banking machines, then you have part of access, which is in my mind a legal act.
Yes. So the question is about the kind of the front end that enables the interaction with the smart contract. I'm leaving that out of the picture at the moment. We will look into this in the next part where we talk about the decentralization. So if you don't mind, we get back to that later.
Yes.
At this moment, I want to get the idea across that there are different setups for smart contracts, and that I believe there can be setups where there is no obligation created at all between users or anyone. That should be the ideal setup that enables kind of decentralized finance. Yeah, so to wrap this part up briefly, on ownerless machines and non-contractual positions, a smart contract can be a means of communication between two or more parties, thus be a communication channel to establish a mutual agreement and legal obligations, yeah, just like any other internet protocol can be. And the question that I want to put out there for you guys to think about and keep in mind when you're maybe also designing smart contract architecture is the question: can a smart contract be designed in a way that users are only exposed to smart contract risk in order to enable non-obligational positions? So not kind of facilitating user A and user B to have a legal agreement, but rather just user A interacting with smart contract and user B interacting with smart contract, and not this direct contractual obligation. Okay. That's just one concept to think about. Let's dive deeper into this topic of decentralization of smart contract arrangements. We have some typical roles in a smart contract arrangement, I would say. So obviously, as you can see, this is Ethereum, and there are a lot of roles and a lot of things happening. But what happens in a smart contract? We have a developer, at least. We have someone who deploys the contract. We have possibly a governor, I would call him, or an admin. We can have some form of oracle or oracles. There will most likely be a host of some kind of front end. There will be some users that, depending on the arrangement, can be called supply-side users. And then there will be maybe other users that are more like buy-side users. Just to generalize these, there can be different types of users. And obviously, you have the validator that it facilitates the smart contract platform. If we look into these roles individually and talk about decentralization, I kind of put it like this. I always ask, can it be decentralized? So I want to go through these roles and ask this question, can it be decentralized? And maybe also discuss with you guys after this talk. So the first role will be the developer. Just publishes code of the smart contract arrangement. Question, can it be decentralized? Why do we ask this question? Because that's what MiCA says in the recital 22. If it's fully decentralized, then it's not a crypto asset service. Well, obviously, the developer itself can be decentralized, but at least contractual liability can be excluded if it's published as free and open source software. I think that's a big factor. You can't really call it decentralized. You can just make it free and open source. The decentralization aspect, I think, is more relevant on smart contract platform level, which is not the scope of this talk today. But that would be basically stuff like client diversity, which doesn't apply to a smart contract itself, right? There can't be a diversity of code in that manner, like it would be for the client of that facilitates the smart contract platform itself. Then we have the deployer who kind of compiles the published code to bytecode, executes a single transaction to deploy a smart contract arrangement on the smart contract platform. And that way the smart contract arrangement gets addresses on the smart contract platform. And this stuff can it be decentralized? Not really. So there's a problem here with the term decentralized, I feel like. It's, I guess, necessarily done by a single entity. There is some fancy stuff you can do, like putting out an MEV bounty to make it as anonymous as possible. But really, at the end, it's one entity that has to execute this single transaction. So I can't imagine this particular step to really be decentralized in a meaningful manner. So it doesn't really fit here, this term. So the question is more, is the deployment relevant or not, or to what extent? The next role would be, the most discussed one, I guess. The governor, as I call it here, controls account that has admin powers over the arrangement and can execute transactions to change the smart contract arrangement. And here there's, I think, a lot to say. So the question, can it be decentralized? One aspect could be just not to allow governance at all. Then it doesn't exist, doesn't need to be decentralized. The other point would be to have it kind of DAO-based, just the typical approach, I would say. There are some problems from a legal perspective. So the DAO may be considered the legal entity if the token holders pursue a common purpose. So that's a very complicated discussion from a legal perspective. The direct voting power may be concentrated in one person or founding team and investors. and the indirect voting power may follow kind of insider groups that actually determine how the vote is going to be casted. So there are problems with concentration of voting power, but there are countermeasures to that, obviously, that people are working on. Sound governance mechanisms like time lock, veto rights, thresholds, etc. So there we can go into the details. But I want to share some insights on what standard setters and legislators or like research groups on that level are, how they are talking about this issue. So that you have the Bank of International Settlements. They released a quarterly review in December 2021, where they claimed full decentralization in DeFi is illusory. A key tenet of an economic analysis is that enterprises are unable to devise contracts that cover all possible eventualities, e.g. in terms of interactions with staff or suppliers. They say centralization allows firms to deal with this contract incompleteness. They were referencing pretty old papers from Coase in 1937 and Grossman and Hart in 1986 on that topic of contract incompleteness. And they draw kind of an analogy there and say in DeFi, the equivalent concept is algorithm incompleteness, whereby it is impossible to write code spelling out what actions to take in all contingencies. There's the link here if you're interested to read more, but they're basically claiming it is not possible to decentralize this, especially the governance aspect. But there are also other publications. If we look at the IOSCO Decentralized Finance Report in 2022, they say on governance tokens, ownership distribution may be concentrated, same issue that I raised initially. They're pointing to pre-mining, investors, and delegation mechanisms. Governance becomes effectively decentralized or vulnerable to being influenced in the same way as might happen in TradFi with activist hedge funds. I think we've actually seen in the recent weeks that stuff like this does happen, referred to as governance attacks, but they basically show the weaknesses of this concept in the current stage of research. And yeah, they're also saying token-based governance structures differ among DeFi products and services. So they're not generally dismissing it, but they see this issue mainly of concentration. Then you have, again, this ESRB task force report from May 2023 that I previously quoted. And they are saying distribution of governance token ownership may be concentrated again, right from the outset or centralized over time, as empirical evidence suggests. With this phrase, they have a footnote pointing to a study, which I get back to a slide after this or two. So this empirical evidence is actually not really there. It's a kind of a misleading claim there in connection with the footnote that they're providing. But they continue to say that, and that's an interesting thought. Alternatively, a service can run on an immutable smart contract where there is no governance, and the underlying open source code might evolve into secure practices over time. This would lead to a need to restart the service after every error. However, because of an iterative trial and error deployment of immutable smart contracts. So they're seeing kind of a way out of this governance decentralization problem by just deploying immutable contracts and just, yeah, I guess, rerouting liquidity or whatever. So I think it's an interesting train of thought there. Additionally, you have the ACPR discussion paper. That's the French financial supervision. I'm not quite sure, but it's a French authority. And they are saying governance tokens are sometimes concentrated in the hands of a few players. Sure, that has been pointed out in the other publications that I mentioned before. And then they add, which is also true, DeFi applications do not rely entirely and sometimes not primarily on the votes of governance token holders. So they are referring to this kind of fake on-chain governance, which obviously is not a decentralized structure. I think we can all agree with that. But to get back to the US point of view, we have the CFTC versus Uki DAO, which also raises a problem with on-chain and token governance, because they are describing Uki DAO as an unincorporated association comprised of holders of Uki tokens. And non-voting token holders appear to be excluded by the CFTC's definition of the defendant unincorporated association, but those token holders who voted against propositions that were carried out are not excluded. So it's kind of a strange outcome, but it this kind of emphasizes the risk that the entirety of token holders may be considered an entity, an unincorporated association, and thus from a legal perspective centralized again in some way. So that's a problem. Then we have this paper that is referenced, has been referenced, as I mentioned, and here it's they are pointing regarding the governance distribution in DeFi. They're pointing to the Gini coefficient, which is basically a statistical representation of the dispersion of assets, and they have this Nakamoto coefficient, which represents the minimum numbers of entities whose cumulative proportions sum to a 51% stake. And they have made some analysis and of several projects, and their conclusion was basically that the token distribution for all 4 observed projects is relatively concentrated. However, the governance mechanisms of DeFi applications poses additional high barriers for protocol changes. This results in a double-digit Nakamoto coefficient for each observed protocol. So there is the possibility to implement sound mechanisms that protect the protocol in this way, and that can help to facilitate decentralization that way. So that was kind of the quick run through all these kind of different opinions on the topic of token governance. Let's go on to the different roles briefly. We have the host of the front end. Provides an on-chain information to internet users, basically. Can it be decentralized? Well, they can at least verify the bytecode that they are kind of pointing to. They can make it also free and open source, so that you can kind of verify what you're interacting with there. And there's the possibility to use protocols such as IPFS, for example. There are probably others as well. So that goes to your question. That's a possibility to kind of decentralize this aspect of it separately. Then you have the role of oracles. They source, verify, and transmit external information, for example, off-chain information simply to the smart contracts. Can they be decentralized? Well, I guess that's a big topic again, which I don't want to dive too deep into, but just briefly mention that Oracle networks with some form of consensus-based verification of information do seem to tackle this problem in a good way, and there's ongoing development there and research going on, but it's obviously a bigger problem. Then we have the user, let's say on some kind of supply side. They enable the smart contract arrangement to function and do what it does. And they may receive some kind of fees from the buy side users. Can it be decentralized? Well, I think it's important that there are more than one user simply. So there have to be multiple unique users actually engaging with this protocol from the supply side. A thing that can help, I think, is also the pooling. It has some security risks, but from the decentralization perspective, I think it makes it so that the interaction happens with the pool and not between users on the buy side and the supply side directly. So I think pooling is there, has some benefits regarding decentralization. Again, is a trade-off regarding security, possibly. but you avoid to have this direct interaction where the smart contract is just a means of communication. And something to think about is probably also a utility token for monetization instead of fees that go from user A to user B. On the buy side, similar thoughts here. The buy side user interacts with the smart contract arrangement and probably pays some kind of fees. Can it be decentralized? Obviously, same thing. There have to be multiple unique users, ideally. If it's only just one user, then it's not decentralized from that perspective. And the same thoughts apply regarding pooling and utility tokens. Then we have the role of the validator. Obviously, that's a whole entire topic for itself. Basically, the decentralization of the smart contract platform itself, which I'm just taking for granted for the purposes of this talk, but it's a role in the smart contract platform to order and execute transactions, basically. A lot more to this, but it should not be the focus of this talk. So just to briefly mention some points. The validation, the consensus, and the economic power obviously should be decentralized. I include a link here to text about this topic by Gabriel Shapiro. So if you want to find out more about this, there's plenty of literature about this topic of the decentralization of the smart contract platform itself. So I think that's just to mention this for sake of completeness, but that would be a whole entire talk by itself. So at this point, we're just assuming when talking about the smart contract that it runs on a decentralized platform. There's a suggestion by the World Economic Forum. They have a paper on this entire topic as well. They are presenting a policymaker toolkit. They have this idea of DeFi service life cycle, which I wanted to briefly mention. As you can see here in the graphic, they're saying it's going from centralized to decentralized, starting with development, going to publication and deployment and operation. I'm not sure if this is a helpful concept in that way. I think this also kind of claims that there's just this one-time deployment and then that's it. We don't have any governance issues and the likes. Oracle issues are not in this, so I'm not sure if this is really helpful. But I guess the idea to take away is that there might be different stages that a protocol runs through that go from centralized to decentralized. So in summary, I think clear decentralization kind of indicators are free open source code, as I mentioned. No governance would be something that will also say, okay, there's nothing to decentralize there. Obviously, practically not feasible, or would have to talk about this more. Yeah, free open source front end with smart contract verification. Multiple unique supply side users as well as buy side users, and yeah, less clear decentralization or a bit more border topics to discuss. The deployment itself, as it is necessarily just one transaction basically. The Oracle mechanisms, which are a huge problem space to be worked on. Then the on-chain governance mechanisms as well. And yeah, ultimately the front-end hosting is also something that is not fully decentralizable, I would say. Yeah, so, and then the last point I wanted to share is the AML-R's relevance for DAOs and DeFi. Here we have the plans by the EU to have a single rule book on these topics, regulation for anti-money laundering, and will include provisions on due diligence of customers, KYC, KYB, transparency of beneficial owners, and yeah, use of crypto assets, for example, and yeah, crowdfunding platforms. And here we have a current amendment proposal, which is definitely not the final version, but it kind of shows what they are thinking about and how they phrase things. So this, I don't expect this particular part to be in the final rulemaking, but it's worth mentioning at this stage. So they're saying decentralized autonomous organizations and other decentralized finance arrangements should also be subject to AML-CFT rules to the extent they perform or provide for on behalf of other person crypto asset services which are controlled directly or indirectly, including through smart contracts or voting protocols, by identifiable natural and legal persons. So it's kind of going into the same direction of if they are only partly decentralized, they should fall under the regulation. But it's not as clear as the recital that I mentioned in MiCA, I would say. So as I said, don't expect this to be the final word on this topic and regarding AML-R. Another one that I wanted to mention before we wrap up is this proposal here, which this is, I think, more likely to make it into the final version, but basically says persons trading in goods or services may accept or make a transfer in crypto assets from a self-hosted wallet address only up to an amount equivalent to 1,000 euro. So this can pose some challenges if we're talking about DAOs and transfers from these wallets that are not crypto asset service providers wallets. This might, create some difficulties interacting with these kind of funds. So there's definitely a need for legal entities that can have accounts at crypto asset service providers in order to facilitate development of new versions and whatever. The limit shall not apply to transfers of crypto assets between natural persons who are not acting in a professional function. So that's important. It does not apply for day-to-day transfers between private persons. And it doesn't apply to transfers where there's a crypto asset service provider in the middle. So that is kind of the way that things will go probably if you interact with a business to pay with crypto and it's over 1,000 euros, then that will have to be routed through crypto asset service provider. And there is further reading and sources. I pasted all of them in here. You will find these slides in the group and on the Meetup page. And looking forward to the discussion and your questions.
I did have a question if you have the time. Thanks very much.
Come again, sorry. I have the earpiece in now.
Hello?
Yes, I hear you now.
Hi, my name's David McLaughlin. I'm a UK lawyer and I've been looking at DeFi issues. And thank you very much. That was a really excellent talk. I've looked at some of those sources myself, but certainly not all of them. One area that I've looked at and not really found anything substantive, but I'm pleased to see you mentioned it, is the Interplanetary File Server, the IPFS. Mm-hmm. It seems to me that it's promising in terms of decentralization of a front end, but I found it very difficult once you get into it to see, how is it different having a website there and hosting a website on the World Wide Web? I mean, I know It is different in that servers are, you don't use servers in the same way, etc. But I found it very difficult to find a legal analysis that might suggest that. I'm not sure there's been any commentary. I just wondered if you'd come across anything on the IPFS specifically.
No, I have to admit that I also have not done like a deep dive into this infrastructure, but as far as I understand, you also have the issue that you kind of need an account there and need to pay for pinning and all of that stuff. So this also kind of points again to one actor kind of controlling this particular front end in some way again. I guess unless there is a community of others that also pin it, I think there are possibilities, but I cannot really elaborate on this more for sophisticatedly.
Yeah, no, that's kind of what I thought as well. Really, that if a number of people, I mean, it's sometimes difficult to tell who has pinned something, but if a number of people were pinning something, then that would increase an argument that there was decentralization.
Right.
And it was something quite different from hosting a website in the normal way. But without that, yes, I see what you mean.
Absolutely, yeah. I think there's potential there. All right. Are there any other questions from the online group? All right, then, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Then we will end this session on the online side and continue offline. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.